Good evening. Welcome to City Council meeting for June 8th, 2021. We are now back under fairly normal procedures with COVID-19. Hopefully everybody has done the wise choice and gotten vaccinated. Because of that, we will still continue to have call-in during our public comment periods. Items listed on the agenda may be taken out of order. 2 or more agenda items for consideration may be combined, and any item on the agenda may be removed or related discussion may be delayed at any time. With that, I will call the meeting to order, and I will also make note that Councilmember Folda is on the telephone participating in the meeting. And we will begin with the invocation from Pastor Ryan Carter.
So much for the privilege that you've given us, these leaders, to join in this room and look at our community. And I pray that you bless them as they seek to make wise choices. Father, we thank you for our country. Such a blessing to have such a country. And Lord, we pray that you protect and bless our country, bless our leadership. Father, also we ask for, our first responders. Lord, we ask you that you bless them. Lord, I've seen some of them here tonight even. And Father, we pray that you bless their families, Lord. That you protect them and that you just allow them just to bring hope into people's lives and the community. And Father, once again, we ask you that you bless this evening. Lord, I pray that you would bless our leaders with wisdom. Lord, that decisions would be made based on wisdom and understanding. Lord, that you would just do exactly in this community as you desire. And Father, we pray that, Lord, we could look past any agendas or anything, Lord, and just see wisdom and make wise choices for you. Bless this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
And thank you, Pastor Carter. Pastor Carter is with the Faith Christian Fellowship here. Thank you for those words. Madam City Clerk, do we have any public announcements?
No announcements.
Thank you. We'll have our first public comment period then. Is there anyone here in the audience that wishes to make comment on an item on the agenda? Please come forward and state your name.
My name is Bob Gerard. I reside at 694 Magic Cove Court in the Blue Lake subdivision. And I thank council and staff for giving us an opportunity to share for a moment, if I can. We have a small community, and in that community, the vast majority of the owners have asked that we try and present a unified opinion of what we'd like to see potentially happen in the way of mitigation of the effects or the impacts on our community of the St. Jude project, which is proposed to go next door to us, on which tonight you're going to be reviewing a modification of their master plan. We have met with the St. Jude staff and with their architect and their civil engineer over a period of time. We've also attended their public informational meetings going back to 2019. And over time, we came down to a reduced series of requests of them to present some mitigating changes in their original plan, which may have actually ended up in the final plan all by itself, in order to basically accomplish one thing. And that's to enhance the view line from our existing houses into the new project and to provide us a level of privacy from those that will be in the new project looking into our area. And so we have proposed 3 concepts, which I'm not going to speak for St. Jude's for Ms. Vela, but she's here tonight, as is the architect, and they are this. We ask that the St. Jude wall, which faces our project, which is in a fairly serious state of disarray, be repaired and refurbished so that it's an attractive accoutrement to our project on our side. Secondly, between the proposed 8-foot steel fence and their meandering parkway, which runs along the bottom of their project, that they plant a row of trees that basically matches our trees so that over time we'll end up with a canopy which allows view line into their open areas but provides for us a measure of privacy. And then thirdly, that along the building edges or facades that face us, that they do what they can to enhance the landscape palette so that the edges of those buildings, the presentation elevations to us, are softened. And all this comes about basically because in the new plan, which differs slightly from the older plan, the buildings are rotated, moved into definitely a more harmonious layout on the St. Jude's project, but it moves closer to our houses. And also, while it had been anticipated that the project would follow grade, instead there's a cut and fill, which elevates the building slab 16 feet in the air. So should you sit in the backyards of any of the 5 houses that directly side onto the St. Jude project, you're in essence are going to see a fairly large amount of dirt that's been piled up and re-landscaped and buildings built on top of them. So it had originally been intended that we might have a memorandum of understanding between ourselves and St. Jude's, but their board has communicated that they would prefer not to use that memorandum of understanding, which we've been discussing. And instead, not meaning to speak for St. Jude's, but Friday, we discussed that perhaps if the council should see fit to insert 3 conditions of approval to the action that I assumed you're going to make on this amended plan, that would be acceptable to both St. Jude's and to the homeowners on our side of the wall as a way of dealing with the mitigation we feel is reasonable to ask for. So that's basically what I have to say. There's before you a letter which supersedes a letter, which supersedes a letter, because we've been trying to keep the city appraised, including at commission, of where we stood with St. Jude. And we have nothing but admiration for Christy Novella and for Ed, their architect and their engineering staff. They've been most accommodating. They've been extremely polite, and they're very professional. So our issue is really, we're just looking for some help with some minor mitigation to keep our neighborhood as private as possible. So that's what I have to say to you this evening.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in public comment who's here in person tonight? All right. Anyone wishing to call in, the phone number is 702-589-9629. Again, this is our initial public comment period. Anyone wishing to call in, the phone number is 702-589-9629. All right. Hearing no one else for public comment, we will close our initial public comment period and move to approval of the regular agenda. Madam City Clerk?
Mayor, I have a public comment that was submitted in writing.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Regarding regular agenda item number 10, dear City Council of Boulder City members, we represent BFE LLC As you know, agenda item number 10 seeks to approve Bill number 1895 to amend the Boulder City Municipal Code to add a section adopting the Boulder City Municipal Airport Aviation Fuel Dispensing, Handling, and Storage Standards, the proposed airport fuel standards. Bill number 1895 is another one of the several attempts by city staff to implement airport standards which are not in the best interest of the citizens of the city and are designed to discriminate against BFE. Among other things outlined below, the proposed airport fuel standards define a mobile refueler as a vehicle having a cargo tank permanently attached to the truck frame. The only purpose of this definition is to disallow BFE's use of its fuel tankers, and there is no justification for such limitation. Even the Environmental Protection Agency, pursuant to its oil spills prevention and preparedness regulations, which imposes strict standards on mobile refueling due to the inherent risk of fuel spillage in any type of mobile refueler, defines a mobile refueler as the following. A mobile refueler is a bulk storage container on board a vehicle or being towed that is designed or used solely to store and transport fuel for transport into or from an aircraft, motor vehicle, locomotive, vessel, ground service equipment, or other oil storage containers. See website epa.gov/oil spills prevention and preparedness regulations. The EPA specifies that among other locations, mobile refuelers may be found at airports. So even the EPA defines a mobile refueler to include a container being towed, just like BFE's mobile fuel tanker. Most of you had the opportunity to speak with BFE's retained expert, John K. Carroll III of Witt O'Brien's. Mr. Carroll provided you with correspondence, a copy of which is enclosed, which outlines the BFE's mobile refueler meets the federal and state level requirements for both a mobile refueler and the more stringent AST requirements. See Exhibit 1 attached here too. Simply put, there is zero rationale for the verbiage in the proposed airport fuel standards requiring that the cargo tank be permanently attached to the truck, and in fact, that definition and requirement is inconsistent with the EPA's definition, as well as dozens and dozens of other airport fuel standards we have reviewed. According to the city's new city attorney during the workshop held to discuss the proposed airport fuel standards, this issue was raised and the city sought further guidance from several experienced FBO area directors that oversee multiple regions who indicated that by far the most common mobile refueler used by fuel vendors is a truck with a fixed cab. See Exhibit 2 attached here too. The fact that most common type of mobile refueler is a truck with a fixed cab has no significance. Just because it is the most common does not mean that it is the most safe, most economical, or most efficient. In fact, the opposite is true. The safest approach would require that the cargo tank be temporarily attached to the truck frame or able to be immediately detached. In the event the truck malfunctions or does not start, if the cargo tank can be detached, another truck can be connected to it and ensure its ability to be oved immediately in an emergency. Utilizing the city's proposal, BFE's refueling requirements would require a minimum of 400 and more likely 600 transfers of fuel from the fuel farm's tanks to the trucks with permanently attached cargo tanks, as compared to 60 per year with BFE's fuel tankers. This does not even take into account the significant amount of additional driving to and from the fuel farm down the taxiway delta, which is not safe. One would wonder, what does the city have against BFE? Why is it intentionally trying to disallow BFE's mobile fuel tankers with no logical reason? As you know, BFE has offered fueling services at the airport for over a decade, and it is entitled to do pursuant to its lease with the city. As set forth in public comment correspondence submitted April 13, 2020 and April 20, 2020, the city provides a refueling service of its own at the airport which directly compete with BFE. It is highly unusual and unheard of scenario for a municipality to be in the business of providing fuel at its airport and competing with its own tenants. It is important for council to understand that the reason the proposed airport fuel standards are being submitted to the council for action in their current form and specifically defining a mobile refueler as a vehicle having a cargo tank permanently attached to the truck frame is because the city does not want competition in its supply of fuel. I'll stop there, and these will be attached to the minutes.
Thank you. And with that, we will close the public comment period and move to approval of the regular agenda. Madam City Clerk, any changes?
No changes.
Mr. City Manager?
No changes?
And Madam City Attorney?
No changes.
Bring it to council. Any changes by council?
No changes.
I'm going to request that item number 7 be moved to follow item number 9. And I will make a motion to do that, move item 7 to follow item 9.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, we'll do the approval of the consent agenda. Again, Madam City Clerk.
I just wanted to note that there was no changes to the agenda other than there's one handout for the minutes. There was a small correction made to the May 11th minutes, page 3, and they're before you and available to the public.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager
No changes?
and Madam City Attorney.
No changes.
Council, any changes or modifications for the consent agenda?
No changes.
Do we have a motion then to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you.
Second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, that will bring us to item number 6 for possible action, matters pertaining to the Copper Mountain Solar family of leases. Ms. Pelletier?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Item number 6 is matters pertaining to the Copper Mountain Solar family of leases. And I can either read all the information at once, and you can do one action, or we can do each one separate. Which do you prefer?
Normally, I do not like to combine these, but these are all very, very similar. I think we could probably take these in one motion.
Okay, so I'll just do a brief explanation of each one. Bill number 1899 is between the City of Boulder City and Copper Mountain 1 to clarify the termination date of the lease and change the rent payment due date to a standard quarterly payment. Then Bill number 1900 and 1901 are very, very similar. They accomplish the same things. So 1900 is between Boulder City. Are we going to do that? Is between Boulder City and Copper Mountain 2 to change the rent payment due date to a standard quarterly payment. And Bill number 1901 is between the City of Boulder City and Copper Mountain 3 to change the rent payment due date to a standard quarterly payment. And 4 and 5 are related. So Bill number 1902 is between the City of Boulder City and Copper Mountain Solar 4 to adjust the lease boundary line between Copper Mountain 4 and Copper Mountain 5 and change the rent payment due date to a standard quarterly period. And Bill number 1903 is between the City of Boulder City and Copper Mountain 5 to adjust the lease boundary line between Copper Mountain 5 and Copper Mountain 4 and change the rent payment due date to a standard quarterly payment. Be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from council? Anyone wishing to make a motion then on bills 1899, 1900, 1901, 1902, and 1903? Councilmember Bridges?
Thank you. I would like to make a motion to accept Bill number 1899, 1900, 1901, 1902, and 1903.
I'd like to second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you, Ms. Pelletier. We'll now move to item number 8 on the agenda. Mr. Mays will not use the term land management plan.
Good evening, Mayor. Now you've jinxed me. Michael?
That's the hope.
Michael Mays, your acting city manager and community development director. Yes, I am back before the council regarding the land management process list. Just a brief explanation of the land management process. This is the mechanism for the community to provide input very early on in the city's consideration of the potential sale or lease of city-owned land. The city maintains a list on the city's website of all of the parcels that have been identified and approved by the council for consideration for potential sale or lease. Even if a parcel is added to the list, it doesn't mean that it's going to move forward and actually either be sold or be leased by the city. Obviously, anything over an acre requires voter approval. Leases need to be approved by the city council. And also, there may be other entitlements required for further consideration of potential uses of city-owned land. This is just the first step in the process. So Skylar Energy Resources is seeking to add an additional 100 acres in the El Dorado Valley area west of Highway 95 and adjacent to the existing town site Southwest Solar Project to the land management process list. They're requesting for it to be considered for solar uses and to be a potential expansion to their existing solar project. On May 19th, the Planning Commission reviewed this request and recommended its approval to the City Council. The City Council, if you are supportive of adding this 100 acres to the land management process list for solar uses, you have before you Resolution 7290 for your consideration. And as with every previous consideration for addition to the list, there is a public hearing component. I can answer any questions.
Again, if anyone on council has a specific question, otherwise we'll proceed to the public hearing and then have comments from council following that. All right, I will go ahead then and open the public hearing at this time for this addition of this parcel to the land management process. Anyone wishing to speak regarding this item? All right, if anyone who is watching at home wishes to make comment during the public hearing, the phone number 702-589-9629. This is the public hearing for the addition of a 100-acre parcel of land to the land management process for use in solar energy production. Anyone wishing to comment? The phone number 702-589-9629. Madam City Clerk, any written comments submitted for this public hearing?
None received.
Thank you. Hearing no one then for the public hearing, we will close the public hearing and bring the matter to council for questions or comments. Councilmember Adams?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just going, my only comment is really more about this process in general and how beneficial I think it is to our community, certainly to us here on council to be able to, review and weigh interests in our public lands and to see how they might be used. And this certainly fits in with that, I believe. And so I think moving forward with this is appropriate, and it gives the public and our community some time to understand what's going on, and then we can move forward from there. So I think it's the right move. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, thank you. I would agree. I appreciate the transparency of the process. It's not like something just appears. There's a whole process. What I'm curious about is how long would this typically take to go from the resolution to add this property to the land management process to the point where it's an actual lease?
So subsequent steps that would be involved is a negotiation for a lease, and in this case, rezoning of the property. So typically, and it's going to vary depending on what entitlements are required for any individual parcel, but it could be something as short as like a 4-month process upwards to a year, depending on what entitlements are required.
Okay. Thank you. And I too, I think it's a wonderful use of our land out there, that the development of the solar industry, and the fact that this is a contiguous parcel, as it appears. So, and I thank you very much for answering the question. I too support that.
Anyone else? Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes, I'd just like to say we're very lucky to be able to have this much solar available to us, and I thank you for all of your hard work for making this possible, Mr. Mays.
Councilmember Folda, any questions or comments regarding this item?
Thank you, Mayor. No, I was able to review this item, discuss it with the petitioners, and yeah, I think we're well on our way through this process, and it's good to have these hearings so we can have public input on how our land is used. So thank you.
Thank you. I would just make note that this is continuation of a project that will be the first use of battery storage. Is that correct, Mr. Mays?
Correct.
And this 100 acres, plus there's also some Bureau of Land Management land that would be part of this addition to the existing project?
I know that Skylar is in discussions with the BLM regarding the potential use. Linda Volan is in the audience if you need clarification on that, but I know they are in discussions with them.
Okay, I believe that's been pointed out in this, that is part of the project. Battery storage, I think, is a good thing, but it's something we've not had before in this community, and we hope for the best when we have some addition like that. Any other questions or comments on this item? Anyone wishing to make a motion on Resolution 7290?
Mayor, I'll move to approve resolution number 7290.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right. We'll then move to item number 7. Or excuse me, item number 9 for possible action. Resolution 7291. Mr. Mays again.
Thank you, Mayor. The city sold approximately 39 acres to St. Jude's Ranch for Children in 1967. Per the 1967 land sales agreement, the Planning Commission and the City Council are to review plans for the development of the property and updates to the master plan. And let me just clarify, when we make reference to the master plan, we are not referring to the Boulder City Master Plan. That is the document that the City Council updates and approves for future land uses. This is referring to the St. Jude's Ranch property, the 39 acres, and their future uses of that property. St. Jude's is proposing a healing center for the northeasternly 10 acres of the property. Originally presented to the City Council in 2020, they have made further modifications, which is contained in your packet. St. Jude's earlier this year held 2 neighborhood meetings to show the changes to the 2020 plan to surrounding residents and to answer questions. The Planning Commission on May 19th recommended approval of St. Jude's modified plans. And so for your consideration this evening is Resolution 7291 that would approve the updated master plan. St. Jude's CEO Christine Vela and her architect Edward Vance with EVA Architects are here to present a brief overview of the project and answer any questions.
Thank you. Ms. Vela?
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. My name is Christina Vela, and I have the joy and privilege of being the CEO of St. Jude's Ranch for Children. This evening, I'm here to present information about our St. Jude's Ranch for Children master plan, which contains the Healing Center. I'd like to provide a brief recap of the purpose of the Healing Center. This one-of-a-kind program will serve an underserved population of child victims of sex trafficking in Nevada that currently have nowhere to go. The specialized residential program will leverage the history of St. Jude's Ranch for Children and our over 54 years history of providing care to child victims of abuse, neglect, and trauma. The Healing Center will provide a holistic program that nurtures victimized children with a beautiful built environment, gardens, walking trails, an on-site school, space for yoga, fitness, beautiful homes, and much more. Previously, when we came before the City Council in 2019, we presented our project, and over the last year, year and a half, there's been a lot of thoughtful work and a lot of attention paid to the project. Therefore, the plans have continued to evolve to get better, and we love our updated design. We're ready to get to work to create this beautiful place. As our previous plan was presented, we are still planning 9 one-story buildings. There's no changes there. Mostly what has changed is the orientation of the buildings, the roads, and all the ways to increase functionality of the space. Additionally, since I last presented to the council, we've onboarded new partners and construction leaders to include Grand Canyon Development Partners, who assist in construction management, and our updated architect, EV&A, or Ed Vance and Associates, and our civil engineer is Tanny. As we did in 2019, as previously mentioned, we've hosted community neighborhood meetings in April of 2021 on 2 separate dates in order to share with our neighbors the updated plans. We provided images of the master plan in person on a big foam core, and also we provided a virtual tour of the Healing Center. It was at one of these meetings that one of our Blue Lake neighbors shared a photo of the condition of the wall that separates our property and that subdivision. Quite honestly, I was not aware of the need of repair of that wall. And at that meeting and subsequently, we have continued to state to our neighbors that we intend to be a good neighbor and we will fix that wall because it's the right thing to do. In a moment, I will ask Ed Vance, our architect, to explain some of the changes to the master plan. However, at the Planning Commission meeting on May 19th, we were encouraged to meet with the homeowners of the Blue Lake subdivision after they had provided public comment, as they've done so today as well, in order to discuss their 3 requests: a review of the grading plans, a repair of the block wall, and the addition of some trees. We went on record at the Planning Commission stating that we will fix the wall, we will add trees, and the very next day after the Planning Commission, so on May 20th, Ed Vance, our architect, our civil engineer, and some of the homeowners of the Blue Lake subdivision actually met. It was a miracle. They were able to meet literally the next day. They spent several hours talking about the project, ADA requirements, and other compliance needs, and I believe there was consensus about the needs of the grading plan that was presented. Subsequently, as mentioned, we received, St. Jude's Ranch for Children received a letter from individual homeowners, not the official homeowners association, but individual homeowners representing the grading plans, the trees, and the wall. And we are happy to go on record that we will address the wall. We will add the trees, and although I am not able to sign the agreement that they provided, we'd like to go publicly on record that we are committed to being a good neighbor and to adding those, fixes of the wall as soon as possible, not at the end of the project. And the trees, certainly, we have in some of the images that we provided, our landscape architect gave some renderings about what the existing wall, it doesn't show obviously the repair of the wall, but it does demonstrate where we envision placing trees, and it also already identifies the types of trees that we will be considering. At this point, I'm respectfully asking for your approval tonight. We are in agreement and we want to go on record to be a good neighbor. We are ready to get to work. And at this point, I'd like to have Ed Vance, our architect, briefly update you on the plans. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Mr. Mayor, council persons, Ed Vance at 1160 Town Center Drive, representing the owner. If I may, perfect. You are a mind reader. I wanted to go back to the master plan because that's part of what we want to approve tonight. As part of our contract, and I better stay close to this microphone, we were charged with not just preparing the new updated healing center plan, which is about a quarter of the overall site. It was really our pleasure to master plan the rest of the site, so the ranch going forward into the next few decades will have a North Star, really, to grow their facilities in a logical and organized way. And that was one of the first things we presented to all of our neighbors at all of our neighborhood meetings. And I think that was met with it was met well with everyone. So if there are any questions about the master plan as you see it now, this is going to take the place of the original master plan that was done, help me remember the date, 1960, 70, somewhere in there. It was a number of decades ago. So, and things have changed quite a bit, as we all know. And so this is a fresh look at what we can expect to do in the future as new capital campaigns come forward. That said, if there are no questions about that, we can move on to the Healing Center, the new layout that we are presenting to you tonight. You've already heard a number of comments, and I want to give a quick shout out to our neighbor, Bob Gerard, who, as Christina mentioned, was kind enough to meet with us in our offices, drove all the way to Summerlin, and met with us there with our civil engineer. And he's a true professional. He understands being a developer. He sat on this side of the fence for probably decades and understands our issues, and instantly gathered exactly what we had gone through in order to make this new plan not only better for the residents that will be living here, but also achieve the goals necessary for us to meet not only ADA requirements, but the fire department's requirements and access around the site. So if you would bring up the new, the blow up at the site itself, the Healing Center, there you go. And so I want to sort of bring you all along. The one thing that differs from the original plan, and again, let's think of that as a sketch. That was an initial concept on how we were going to go forward. And once we got a hold of it, one of the things we didn't care for too much is that the roads were all over the place, and the kids would have to cross the roads. And we thought that was a bad idea. So all the service roads now are on the outboard side of the plan, and all walking paths are on the inside. So we saw this as really almost a compass, if you will. And as we look to our northwest, that's actually facing due north. And that became a compass. And the concept and the metaphor of this is that it gives the kids a North Star, because they're going to need that kind of approach. They're a bit lost, and so we want to help them find themselves. And so it's a new beginning, and the plan ends up contributing to that healing process, and we're kind of proud of that. As Bob had mentioned, you're right, we have to cut and fill this project, so we will have a lower end toward the north end of the site, where the tallest building, and if you kind of rotate through some of those slides, you're going to see a taller building that's actually a two-story. It's not really a two-story building, it has a clear story above it. But the reality is, when that building gets built, it's only going to be 4 feet above where it currently stands. So we're going to be actually cutting into the earth. So the tallest of the very tall buildings will actually be very much below where it currently is. So that's the building there. So that'll only be about 4 feet. So we're cutting the earth there. We're going to be placing it there, and therein lies the issue with the neighbors, because we had to kind of balance the site. So we had a more flat site, so that we could have the fire department, cars, ADA requirements. It was a challenge, and Bob understood that. And so the grading issues became a moot issue. The challenge became, how do we then provide adequate landscaping to sort of buffer that edge? And I have a new plan here that this is what we came up with, a new landscape plan from our landscape architect, and a palette of trees that I would like to enter into the record somehow. Do you have that now? Or you already have it? Good. Excellent. And if you don't have it, then I'm going to give it to you. I got it. You do? Everybody's well informed. How great is that? Having said that, I think we've got a solution now that meets everyone's needs. And as Christina mentioned, we're committed to meeting the requirements of our neighbors and our constituents. And we humbly ask for your approval tonight. Any questions? I'm here to answer anything you may have.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes, I'd like to make a comment. St. Jude has been a neighbor of mine for over 20 years. And when I served as president of the association for 16 years, we had the pleasure of interacting with St. Jude on many occasions. The children are awesome. They're certainly an asset to the community, and so I look forward to this proposal.
Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, thank you. I come up with this concept of community partnership, of instead of working against and having an adversarial relationship and I'll do this, but you have to do that, and to see that you are all working together as a partnership, sort of an unusual partnership, because typically the neighbors and whatever that is that's going on over there is more adversarial, and it just makes me really happy to see that, and the willingness to adjust to rotate it to acquire trees. I know that that's a big deal. And so I'm very pleased to see this. And the whole concept is the condition in which the condition that's created by it does not make me happy. The solution that you all have found and working together does make me very happy.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilmember Adams?
Thank you. Yes, obviously, I'm very proud that we have St. Jude's here in Boulder City. I can't think of a better community for these children to be. And yes, and just like Council Member Bridges said, I am very pleased to see a working together with the neighbors to try and come to come to an agreement on what is amenable to everybody. I guess my question is, with these new additions here and with our approval, are we essentially approving this, and then this is what will be done then, including with these new additions with the landscape? Is that correct?
If you're referring to the handouts of the dais, our recommendation is that you would include that as part of the resolution. All the other material has already been provided in the packet and is tied to this resolution.
With that being said, my comment would be that it would appear to me that in moving forward with and including this with that we would also be meeting the needs of the neighboring community next to it. So.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilmember Folda?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to comment that, I hear the residents and their concerns, and I believe St. Jude has heard them to the extent that they can control, with the landscaping issue and the way that the property is sloped. There will be buildings above them, but I think they are hearing and trying to mitigate the as much as possible, and being a good neighbor. And I appreciate both sides working together to make for the common good. And I hope that this can all move forward positively, and that it can be amenable for both parties. So thank you.
Thank you. I've had the opportunity to attend the public meetings this year and previous. St. Jude's has been extremely open about this entire process. They've looked for input from not just the neighbors, but the entire community. I believe I was in 6th grade in this building when St. Jude's originally opened. It's been part of this community, I think, very successfully. We have a need for the services that St. Jude's provides. I do understand the concerns anytime something changes here in Boulder City, which doesn't happen often. That gets people's attention. This particular project, I believe the buildings are still some 100 feet away from the edge of the property.
Yes, sir.
That's an extremely large setback for any type of commercial property, and this is in essence a commercial property. It is residential in nature, and it's run by a nonprofit. I think too that we need to be cognizant of the fact that this is a master plan at this point. These aren't specific plans yet. There will be a considerable process that will be necessary. Is that correct, Mr. Mays, as far as once they get plans and submit them for their permits?
Yes, certainly there would be building permit review for subsequent plans. And if there's any modifications to the master plan, just like with council consideration this evening, it would be brought back before the Council and Planning Commission.
Okay, and the reason I ask that is I think there's still going to be ample time for the neighbors or anyone to be able to attend hearings, to make their comments throughout this process. So I believe that St. Jude's has worked with people to an extent really that they are not obligated to do. They have had this property for over half a century. They can do certain things on that property, and I think they've been very forthcoming with the information, very welcoming to suggestions for changes. With these changes then, we just need a motion to adopt the resolution with the changes that have been brought forward this evening.
That would be correct.
And that's
adding that as conditions.
Okay. I would then make a motion for approval of Resolution 7291 with the changes that Mr. Vance has discussed here this evening.
I would like to second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Mr. Vance, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to all the folks that live down there. I think we're on the right track here.
Bob, if I
Ms. Vella, thank you. All right, now we will return then to item number 7 for possible action. Review draft request for proposals to market track 350. Mr. Armitrout, you must have drawn the short straw here.
I'm the B team. Our finance director had to step out for a moment. Back in March, we brought a draft RFP to the City Council to consider Track 350 and how you would like to market it. Before I go much further, I'm Brock Armitrout, your contracts and real estate manager. And at that meeting, you reviewed several responses to a request for information, or RFI, that we'd sent out to the development community to get ideas on what they would like to see or how they believe the site could be developed, and that would generate interest from the development community to bid on a subsequent RFP and construct homes on the site. After much discussion, many comments were made by the City Council regarding what they might like to see, and staff heard, while there wasn't a consensus or motion made, we heard the following suggestions as what you would like to see in the RFP. And I'll go ahead and read through these, and these are on page 232 of your report if you're following along. First was to not be specific in limiting developments to a certain zone, but to provide options. Second was to allow the respondent to propose alternate zoning and density for the project, and at the same time allow the respondent to provide a suggested zoning text for a custom zone classification. That would be if we don't have an existing zone classification that meets what they're proposing for density. Another was to include a requirement that development density for lands adjacent to Adams Boulevard and Bristlecone Drive to be no higher than 4 units per acre. Now, there was a requirement that development density for lands adjacent to Clubhouse Drive be no higher than 10 units to the acre. The design of landscape improvements along the west side of Bristlecone and south side of Clubhouse would be up to the respondent, although they should complement existing landscaping. Being identical was not to be required. The city would not entertain variances to the subdivision requirements. The respondent must provide for a park in the proposed development. The respondent must indicate the nature and timing of the purchase, i.e. would they buy it all in one shot, or would they want to take it in multiple phases? After receiving your input, staff came up with 3 additional requirements that we feel would help you evaluate any RFP responses. And those suggested additional requirements would be to provide a draft subdivision layout with approximate lot count, location of park improvements, and other proposed improvements. And the purpose of the requirement is to assist city staff to make sure their proposed zoning and development densities are realistic and will work within our subdivision standards and public safety requirements. The next requirement we'd like to add into the RFP is to have them provide sample building elevations and floor plans, but add a note in the RFP that the final product may vary. The purpose of the requirement is to enable the City Council to better visualize what the final look of the development might be upon completion. And then the third suggested additional requirement is to provide 3 examples of similar developments constructed by the developer in Clark County. The purpose being to provide the council with a representative reference sample of what the respondent's work in Clark County has been. Also, during that discussion of the RFI, there was much discussion about the proposed storm drain improvements along Bristlecone, and you asked the Public Works Department to provide information about what those may cost, and sample cost allocations would be to the individual lots, depending on how many lots there would be, and his email is within your packet. So at this point, we're ready to take additional input. If you're ready to move forward, to have a staff directive to issue the RFP. If you're not ready to move forward, to give staff additional direction, ideally in the form of a motion so that we're clear what you intend, and then we can move forward at that point.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Councilmember Hoskins?
Thank you, Mayor. I would just like to mention that back in November 2020, I asked staff to place this on the agenda, and because we had not had any responses on the RFPs. And I'm so excited that we went out with an RFI and we got the response that we got. I want to thank you, Brock, Paul, and Diane, for all of you working with me and listening to all my moans and groans and not understanding exactly some things. And a special thanks to Diane, our finance director, for her brilliant idea on financing the pool project with 90% of the proceeds from the sale of this land. I reviewed this thoroughly. I have no suggestions or changes to add to the RFP at present.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Mayor, I have a comment.
Councilmember Folda?
Thank you, Mayor. I can't see if we're a little delayed, so if Mr. Armstrong's still there. I had a question. If you could clarify section number 5. This has been a topic that has been brought up by the community a lot, concerned about overpopulating that area. If you could, similar to what he explained to me before, of what the minimum lot size would be for 4 dwellings per acre, so that they can get an idea of what zoning that would be and what that would look like, similar to the neighboring areas.
If they were to max out the 4 units to the acre, that would be a lot size of a little less than 7,000 square feet. You would think, okay, if you multiply or divide 43,000 square feet by 7, it's a lot more, it's a lot of lots, but whenever any development, you automatically have to subtract 40% of the land area for all required public improvements, for the street, the sidewalk, the curbs, any other public infrastructure that may be put in, such as perimeter walls, buffer landscaping, and so on. So for 4 units to the acre, you're looking at a lot size of roughly 6,800 square feet. We don't have such a zone, so if someone were to want to maximize at 4 units to the acre, they would have to propose their own zoning language for a brand new zoning district. Or they could do an R17, which is roughly 3.7 units to the acre, using the standard formula, taking out 40% and what have you. When we've played with various scenarios, how we would develop it as city staff if we tried to pretend we were developers, the R17 came up consistently with roughly 3.7 units to the acre. A developer might be able to squeeze in a few more lots, but that's roughly what the density would be. Obviously, the larger the lot size, the lower the density. An R115 gets you closer to 2.5 units to the acre, primarily because 2 lots will give you 30,000 square feet, leaving roughly 13,000 square feet for streets, curb gutter, and so on, out of each acre. So does that answer your question, Ms. Folda?
Yes, could you give a comparable of what size R17 would look like? We have a neighborhood area that's similar.
The majority of Boulder City is zoned R17. The Del Prado neighborhood, what's commonly referred to as the upper Girl Streets, those are all R17 zoning areas, if you're familiar with those areas. The lots are typically 70 feet across by 100 feet deep, although that may vary with at least being 70 feet, but some lots may be deeper. Some might be a little wider, a little shallower, depending on the topography, but that's generally what you would expect for an R17. And again, that would be the upper Girl Streets and the Del Prado area, what I call the horsey streets, Bronco, Pinto, and so on, are also R17.
And what is the zoning across the street, the new Storybook development?
R18, I believe, isn't it?
No, majority of Storybook is R17.
Oh, sorry,
And the southern portion is R110.
Okay. Can't see that far.
So basically, it's very comparable to what's happening across the street. With that, no higher than that density along Adams Boulevard and Bristol Cone.
That's correct.
Thank you. I have no other questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Adams?
With regards to the improvements that are needed for the storm drain, we were talking about during our briefing how that's taken into consideration during appraisal. So I guess my question is, regarding how we're looking at wanting to see that project completed, that's going to be, it's no matter what, it's going to be considered in the appraisal of that land. Is that correct?
Whether or not staff indicates it to the appraiser that a storm drain would be required, the appraiser, assuming that they're good appraisers, would already take that into account. This is standard practice over the hill for developments. They look at a variety of factors, including any major street requirements that may be required. In our instance, we're not requiring a major section line roadway, but drainage, utility extensions, things along those lines are all taken into account by the appraiser when they come up with the value of the property, regardless of who the seller is. We just happen to be a government entity with special knowledge about what some of those requirements may be, but regardless if we were a private entity or a government entity, they would still take those into account.
Thank you. And then the other thing we talked about, and this is just more so for the public's understanding, there is a little bit of the chicken and the egg, the conundrum in seeking the appraisal and zoning, because obviously zoning is considered when we go into appraisal, but we're obviously looking at potential different zoning than R17 as opposed to the R15 that's currently there. So how does that process work itself out?
When they do an appraisal, they take the existing zoning and come up with what they believe the lot yield would be to come up with a primary value, and then they do various deductions. So with the zoning of the R110 and R115, as it currently stands, you're looking at a lot yield roughly 110 to 115 lots. And so they will come up with a value based on that, then do their deductions. If we were to change the zoning to something different, such as an R17 product, maybe mixed with some R3 and maybe R10, depending on how things are proposed, your lot yield would be higher. So as they come up with a value, they would use that higher lot yield and come up with a new value. It's not really fair to have the appraiser try to guess what the city council is going to zone it in the future. So whereas in the past we had the appraisal done before we did the RFP because we had set in stone what the zoning was going to be, this time around we're kind of doing it different, where we'll let them propose zoning. Then we would have them go through the entitlement process to obtain the zoning, and then at that point we would have the land appraised, and then they would have to pay the higher of either the appraised value or their bid price, whichever ends up being higher. And the way the RFP is written, if they don't want to pay the higher price, if it ends up being higher than their bid price, they'd be allowed to walk away, and we would go to the next bidder, assuming their proposal, or they would accept the zoning that was put in place.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? I'd like to just briefly go over some of the history of this. This particular area was first proposed for sale in 2004 to pay for the construction of Boulder Creek Golf Course. The voters had rejected it that year. It was proposed again in 2010, and at that time it was approved by the voters. Nothing really occurred after that approval. I believe it was in 2016 that a layout or a proposed development was put forth. Is that correct?
The city had put out to bid this parcel on Tract 349 concurrently. We had some sample layouts, and then the city council, based on the 6 or 7 different scenarios, decided they wanted to go with the current zoning classifications of an R110, R15, and R7 at the lower end. And then it went out to bid, and at the time land values were such that it was our understanding from conversations with potential bidders that they did not bid because they couldn't make a pencil. Things are considerably different now. Back then, the high-end homes were selling for $300,000. Now they're $500,000 plus. And there's a variety of other factors for why that is. But in conversations with the developers who call me weekly, they have no problem bidding on this property and hoping to build on the site.
Okay. And again, that, even at that time, and as I say, I believe that was 2016, there were already a mix of lot sizes that were being considered by the city anyway. At that point, as you pointed out, there was 15,000 square foot, 10,000 square foot, and 7,000 square foot lots that were already anticipated as a potential. And again, the response at that time was that they were not interested. When these questions have been proposed, there's always been 10% of the sale of land was going to go for public safety, fire and police needs, and the other 90% was going to go for the cost of building Boulder Creek Golf Course. Well, the cost of the golf course had to be paid off regardless of whether voters approved of this sale or not, and that resulted in the golf course debt being paid off by using other taxpayer funds over the course of time. So there is no debt any longer for the golf course, but during that period of time where the city was having to pay that debt off, clearly there were other projects that were going by the wayside. So there is a separate question out there regarding using 90% of the revenue from this sale for possibly financing pool. But these two really aren't related. The land was approved for sale back in 2010, and whether the voters approve the question about how to use this money, that has always been the focus of this, was to put this land up for sale. So that's where we're at. I know some folks may be, conflating the two issues that, well, we're doing this only for the pool. No, this has been more than a decade that the residents had approved this for sale, and the sale has not moved forward. So I just want to make that point clear that this is a separate process. Yes, it's being related to potential financing for the pool under ballot questions that the result won't be known for, but the intent to sell this land has been there for quite some time. The other thing that I appreciate when Councilmember Hoskins brought this back to City Council was, rather than the city trying to be developers, which, we do a lot of good things well, that may not be one of the ones that's highest on our list of things we do well, is to get developers to provide their input on this. One thing we do want to do is to maximize the return of sale of the land to the city. We owe that obligation to our taxpayers, to our residents. We want to get not necessarily the absolute highest amount for this, but we certainly don't want to be in a position where we're simply giving away value for others to enjoy. This should be the benefit of residents here in Boulder City. With that said, I think that this RFP process, we would want to encourage developers to provide more than one response if they wish to do that. So they may come up with different mixes of lot sizes, residential building types, and to have them tell us what they think would be the most desirable in an area like that. It's well known that construction around a golf course is a desirable place to build homes. The upkeep of the golf courses, that's been difficult for entities to be able to support over time. But certainly the land around golf courses has been identified as being something that is desirable and valuable. So that would be something that I would recommend, is that we encourage the developers to come back with however many proposals they would like to make, to give us some more options, give our community more options on what they would like to see there and what would be the best return on the value of that land. I know it's been said that I've suggested there be substandard housing built there. I would like to put that to rest. I wouldn't want to see substandard housing built anywhere in Boulder City, but especially not around Boulder Creek Golf Course. I do think that there are high-end examples of townhomes, condominiums, attached dwellings, all of those types of things I've seen around golf courses. You know, you can go into Las Vegas and take a look at the Las Vegas Country Club. They have a high-rise there. They have, well, we're not going to do that in Boulder City, but they have townhomes, they have large homes, they have all kinds of homes around that, and that was one of the first golf course developments in Las Vegas. It's not an unusual thing to do, and developers, I think, find that that gives them flexibility on what they can build and what they can sell. So I think at this point, we should not be recommending specific zoning, and that's what's in these recommendations, is to have the developers come back and make recommendations. That does not tie us or the community or anyone into adopting anything specific. That's just asking for these things to be suggested to us, and that decision will get made once we've had an opportunity to review all of the proposals that might come in. As far as the special tax district that's been discussed, if the city were to sell this land and then assume all of the cost for improvements in infrastructure, that means that all the residents that currently live here in Boulder City get tagged for paying for that. As Mr. Armentrout had mentioned earlier, it's very common developments in the Las Vegas area. When the appraisers look at that, they're going to put a price on there for those improvements. And then it gets to be, well, who pays that price? And quite often, that's why when you drive down a street in some of the newer areas, only half the street is there. Whatever that entity is, whether it's Clark County, City of Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, Henderson, they're waiting for the owner of the land on the other side of the street to do their development, and then they're responsible for completing that street. So this isn't unusual either, and I believe the figures that the Public Works Director, Mr. Littrell, had come up with would be, if the costs were done up front, between $10,000 and $16,000 on lots. Having looked at what developers charge for lot premiums, that doesn't seem to be out of the ordinary. If it were charged for on a monthly basis over the course of a 30-year mortgage, it would add between $45 to $70 per month. Again, I'm not interested in seeing any type of development done where the cost gets put onto our existing residents. So I believe that needs to be incorporated into the RFP, that those types of improvements in infrastructure would need to be within a special tax district. And Madam City Attorney, Mr. City Manager, I'm not sure what the complexity of doing that is. I know that it gets done fairly often to create these special tax districts, but that also is something that would actually have to be approved later. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mayor. The tax districts are governed by NRS 2 Chapter 271. There's generally 3 ways to create them. You can do it by provisional order, petition, which is typically used for existing subdivisions, and then by development agreement. Here, we'd probably use the develop agreement route, but staff would need to do considerable more research into exactly how this would be created, what the cost of implementation would be, etc. So we'd have to do some additional research into that.
Okay, but that is something that could be put into the wording of an RFP, that costs of infrastructure would be paid for via a special improvement district.
I'll defer to Michael for that question, but.
I think, again, for the City Council, this is an opportunity for the developers to respond with flexible alternatives. I think you can make reference that that's something that the city is interested in contemplating, so the developers are aware that that would be a consideration. And obviously, until we get to the greater details on a SID or LID and what it would cost to to manage that and come back to the council with that. I don't think you need to make those decisions tonight. You can just simply indicate that is something the council is interested in exploring for those specific improvements.
Okay, so that could be part of the RFP.
We would just make note of that in there, that that's something the city would be considering.
All right. Also, something I did not see was the potential for deed restrictions that would advise any purchaser of a property there of the potential of repurposing of the golf course.
Mr. Armentrout, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought there was a reference to that.
I may have missed it.
It's not included in the RFP. It would have been in the standards themselves that would be adopted. We could include it in the background material for the RFP to make it clear up front so that they don't miss it. They typically don't, but we could put it in the body, not into an appendix, to make it very clear if that's your preference.
Okay, again, I feel that's necessary in the current environment. You know, I do not have plans, and let me say that slowly and a second time. I do not have plans to see the golf course repurposed. However, we have seen that. It is common across the country, and to have the city be put in a situation 20 or 30 years from now where it cannot sustain that golf course and there would be possibly no interested buyer in it. There are very complex litigation occurring in the Vegas Valley right now regarding golf courses. So I think that needs to be made clear. I know the developers are aware of it because of all that's happened in the valley. But again, I think the city needs to put that out there from the very beginning.
For reference, we would put that as probably 9.10 in the RFP.
Okay. And I believe those are my concerns. Anyone have other thoughts or comments? Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, as it stands, are we looking at asking them to come up with plans for residential only?
It's my understanding.
Okay, I know that one of them had come in at the beginning with this idea of storage facilities, and I had several people concerned that are we going to make sure that this property is going to be used for residential only?
Mayor, the 2010 ballot question specifically was for residential development of Track 350.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Well, I would concur with the requirements that you've set forth, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Do you want me to summarize that, Mr. Armentrout, or do you want to summarize it so that...
If I summarize what I understood, and then you can
I
say,
would much prefer that.
Okay. What I heard is that you would like to encourage multiple responses from each applicant. It's their choice, but you would like to encourage them to provide multiple responses so that they can explore multiple densities. You would like me to remove the density limits that we have listed, the 4 units to the acre and the 10 units to the acre. That would allow them to provide their multiple responses. You would like us to add a provision in there to make a note that the city would explore the creation of a SID or a LID for the installation of the stormwater improvements along Bristol Cone. And then the last one was that we would put a clarifying note into the RFP, and I suggested in section 9.10 that there would be a deed note put on, or a deed restriction not deed restriction, a deed note, that there is no guarantee that the golf course will ever be there, always be there, that at some point it could go away, so that they're put on notice as such. I probably didn't say that correct, but we do have language already written for that. Did I capture what everyone had voiced?
I believe so. Anyone else? Then we need a motion. I move that we proceed with the RFP process based on what was offered to this, plus the changes or additions we've discussed tonight.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Mr. Armentrout, thank you for taking good notes. I appreciate that.
I try my best. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll move to item number 10 for possible action, consideration of Bill 1895 regarding airport fuel standards.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Item 10 is consideration of Bill 1895, an ordinance of the City of Boulder City, Nevada to amend Boulder City Municipal Code, Title 9, Chapter 4, adding a new section to adopt the Boulder City Municipal Airport Aviation Fuel Dispensing, Handling, and Storage standards that are attached here too. To give some background on how these standards came to be, in early 2019, the city retained Aeroplex airport consultants and who recommended an update to the airport rules and minimum standards to contain information related to fuel storage and dispensing. The Aeroplex further advised that if we didn't update the full rules and regulations and minimum standards, we could consider drafting a fueling standards document that would expand on the information already contained in the existing minimum standards, that would address and put into place enumerated industry standard regulation for the fuel dispensing and handling and storage for our municipal airport. So we began developing this based on examples from other airports in some of the surrounding regional area, Nevada and Arizona, and then they were modified to meet the needs of the Boulder City Municipal Airport. Several references were utilized during the development of these standards, including FAA advisory circulars, orders and grant assurances, industry standards, including the ATA 103, National Fire Protection Association, NFPA 30, 407, 410, etc., the International Fire Code. And over the course of developing the fuel standards, we consulted with several professional groups, the FAA Airport District Office, our consultant, Aeroplex, Fisher Engineering, 3 attorneys, 2 fire chiefs, fire inspector, the 2 airport managers, and assistant airport manager, who's now our current airport manager, as well as the commercial tenants at the Boulder City Airport. So, in giving the staff report contains a more detailed timeline in addition to that, but that's just an overview of the foundation for these standards, how they were drafted. They went through several revisions. The most current version, largely incorporates what's already required of fuel service providers by various federal regulations and industry standards. But the benefit of these standards is that it provides the regulations in a manner that's easy to understand and follow for all parties, so that all parties understand their rights and obligations with regard to fueling at the airport. In addition, the fueling standards provide Boulder City Airport Management with the tools that are needed to monitor the fuel services being provided, the permits, the airport fueling cards, auditing rights, etc. Those allow for the airport to have better oversight over fueling at the airport. They create the following permit categories. We have a fuel vendor permit. That's for commercial operators who wish to engage in selling and dispensing aviation fuel. The mobile refueler permit, which is for the fuel vendors for use of each of their mobile refuelers. And at this time, I will let you know we have updated the fuel standards, and an updated page 10 and page 19 is on the dais for you. The definition of mobile refueler has been amended to remove the requirement that the cargo tank for the fuel be permanently attached to the truck. So the word permanently is struck, and now we just require that the mobile refueler have the tank attached to the trucks. It doesn't have to be permanent necessarily, but it can be a trailer or something like that. And that's for you at the dais and will be included in the packet within 24 hours. And is intended to replace those pages for if the standards are adopted today. These standards would require each of these trucks to have those permits. Again, for the fuel vendors that are selling fuel, those permits will be required for the mobile refuelers. There's also a fuel storage system permit, which will be needed for anyone operating, installing a fuel storage system. And the fuel distributor permit, which is there's actually an existing permit in place, and this just codifies that. In addition, the fuel standards also promulgate detailed requirements for training where fueling can and cannot occur, standards for fuel equipment, spill response reporting and prevention, quality control and annual inspections, and auditing. We also sent these fuel standards to the commercial operators on March 10th. We held a workshop on the standards in which we engaged with the commercial tenants. They provided a lot of valuable feedback, which we addressed. And we, for example, we added a section on non-commercial self-fueling to address those circumstances in which those tenants are self-fueling. We added a time frame in which permits must be issued so that the individuals understand when, or have a time frame which we will definitely issue a permit so they're not waiting, etc. So we made those changes following the workshop, and before you today is the product of that. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. We also have Marissa Dew, our airport manager, is available as well to answer questions, and I believe our fire chief is available if needed.
Thank you. Questions or comments from council? Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes, I would just like to say that I did a great deal of research on the verbiage permanently attached, so I'm very pleased to see that you've removed that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, this has been a long, grueling process. And I would like to thank the city attorney for her work on this, too. I know that this was quite a document to have to wade through to start out with, and to see where it is today compared to where it was before, and including the changes and making it a what I consider a reasonable set of requirements and standards and permit expectations. So I'm happy to see this last change on the attached frame, because there's also other descriptions of the tank on an attached frame where it has to be attached to, in the trucking industry, you have the cab, you have the trailer, and the frame can be the whole thing or just the trailer. So I'm just glad we're out of that argument now, and we have that piece removed. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilmember Adams?
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to thank everybody, staff, those in the community who reached out about this with concerns. This has been a very long process. I don't think the airport was ever mentioned once when I was campaigning, and it certainly has been one of the biggest issues and things that we have been researching and having to deal with. So I am very pleased to see all of that work coming to this. I think it's very reasonable. I'm happy to see that language. It was the one remaining thing that I personally was not totally comfortable with having it be permanently affixed, just because it wasn't language I saw anywhere else. And though it might have been the standard other places, it wasn't necessarily a requirement. So, but other than that, just about everything else and reviewing other, other airports and similar language, this is right in line with all of that sort of stuff. So I think what we've got here was a lot of work, but I think we've got something that's fair and will benefit the residents, the users, and the airport in general.
Thank you. Councilmember Folda, any questions or comments?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to comment that, I was really opposed about how these came about in the first place, and the language that they had were very much authoritative, and you shall. I've been submitting a lot of changes to help this be softened and be more what its intent should be, which is to focus on safety at our airport. And while a lot of the changes have been made, and I'm glad that staff has acknowledged and recognized that there's language in there that can't really be backed up, I still have concern that there's still additional language in this particular document that that is the same as what the other issue was with the fixed truck. In particular, one issue that I have is under section 4.4, the truck-to-truck transfer. They also include top loading in that one. The issues that I have are because there are things that are already being done down in our airport that this document would prevent from happening. And I have a concern with the leases that we have that allow those things to happen and having this document be in conflict. So that being said, of course, we can make whatever rules we want. However, I do want them to be backed up by rules that are common and used. Under the truck-to-truck transfer, in this document, it has a footnote to number 34, which referenced NFPA 407, 4.2.3.6. So you would think that would say that it's not okay to do truck-to-truck transfer. But what that actually states under the NFPR, the 4.2.36 reads, transferring fuel by pumping from one truck vehicle to another truck vehicle within 200 feet of an aircraft shall not be permitted. So it's not saying it's not a permitted use, it just needs to be away from another aircraft. So this is the kind of language that I am really concerned about. I'm glad staff is acknowledging that there's language in there that needed to be changed, but I feel like we haven't hit all of them, and I have a concern with the current users at our airport and the things that they do on a daily basis, and that this document might be in conflict with that and with their lease agreements. So that is my concern. I want it stated for the record. I thank council for going through this process and trying to eliminate those things that shouldn't be in this document. I think we still have one more step, but I think it sounds like everyone's just glad to have it over with, which I'm kind of sad about, because I would like this to be a good document for the future. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Again, I would suggest that this is the time. If changes are to be made, we are here tonight to consider this. We've been off and on considering this. We've had it come up on agendas before and be removed, have language amended and brought back. Again, if that needs to be done, that needs to be done. But this thing has been amended several times already. So if there are additional amendments, those should now be offered, I believe.
Thank you, Mayor. Then I would propose removing 4.4 from the document. And I appreciate the council's support with other language changes that I've made and supporting those as I've done a lot of research on this and I've read a lot of other fuel standards for other airports and talked to a lot of leaders in this industry. I would appreciate your support in this. Thank you.
Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I would have to agree with Councilwoman Folda that that has been a concern of mine. I know that I've done a lot of research. I probably have books about 6 inches thick. I know that most airports have it where you cannot do truck to truck, but that doesn't mean that it's a rule and regulation with FAA. I can't cite any regulation. I don't know if anyone else can, but I do have an issue with that also.
Chief Gray, is that something that you can comment on?
I would absolutely. So one thing I want us to consider in Boulder City is a lot of airports, sorry about that, like McCarran, they have firefighters at the airport with crash trucks. So when you do a high-risk operation like truck-to-truck transfer, which is a high-risk operation, if something happens, you can have fire trucks by FAA standard to that event within 2 minutes. That's impossible in Boulder City. If we have an event like that takes place and there's a fire or something, we'll get there, but it's not going to be in 2 minutes. And we don't have the foam trucks and the crash trucks and this stuff to take care of that. So when you do see those high-risk operations, they're typically at airports that have manned fire trucks, specific crash trucks. And so they make a big difference. So those trucks carry thousands of gallons of water. They have a lot of foam. They can make a big attack on that really quick before it spreads. We can't do that in Boulder City. So where it might be permissible at some places, in our opinion, it's a very unsafe operation in our city because we don't have the equipment and the people standing by for that to occur. So from a fire protection thing, it seems like it's a big risk. So I know it does say in the code where it's 200 feet from an airplane, but again, there's a reason for that because it's a risky operation. It's not, that's not arbitrary. There is inherent risk there. So for us, it is a concern. So.
You're talking.
Mayor, can I address Chief Shea? Chief Gray?
Yes, go ahead.
Chief Gray, 4.4 reads that truck-to-truck transfer and/or top loading is only done in extraordinary or emergency circumstances with the explicit permission and direction of the airport manager and/or the fire chief. There are times when helicopters come in with their own trucks and are refueled by other trucks. Would you give permission, since you are allowed to under this 4.4, to give permission in those kind of instances where there are extraordinary, not regularly done? Would you give permission in that instance?
I guess we'd have to define what an extraordinary circumstance is, but I would think that's something that's not routine. And if that were to occur, we would actually get our guys on the trucks and we would go to the airport and we would stand by so that if during that extraordinary circumstance something occurred, we would have firefighters there. Granted, we don't have the same equipment, but we would be better off already being there. It would eliminate 6 or 8 or 10 minutes of travel time, which with aircraft fuel on fire, that's an eternity. So in that extraordinary circumstance, which I would guess would be some kind of a medevac, or some way they got to transfer fuel in it. I mean, again, I don't know what that extraordinary circumstance will be. We'd have to define that, but it wouldn't be a routine thing. But like I said, we would get our fire equipment, we would roll it out there, we'd be on the tarmac, we'd be near it, kind of like you see when there's a declared emergency or some things, or other high-risk activities on airfields. You see I don't know if you've flown and you look out the window and you see those crash trucks parked on the runway, and it's not because something's crashed, it's because there's a potential for something, and so they're ready. And so in that event, we would actually, if it was already approved by the airport, then we'd come out and stand by. But on our own, I don't know that as a fire chief that I would be authorizing, because I don't know what's considered extraordinary here. I don't know what would meet that level. I mean, I'm not saying there can't be. If there's a good explanation, then absolutely. But again, we would go ahead and stage out there. But we obviously can't stage out there every day we can't have extraordinary events every day.
Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, thank you. It was mentioned that it's in their lease. Is this something that they are allowed by lease currently to do, or anybody to do?
Their lease is expressly subject to airport rules and regulations, and including these standards have adopted. To my knowledge, I'd have to look at the lease, but I would be surprised if there was anything about truck-to-truck transfer specifically. Typically, from what I understand after discussions with several industry professionals, is that truck-to-truck transfers is really rarely used. And in emergency circumstances, the example that was given to me was like when they're fighting fires in the Pacific Northwest and they have to fuel aircraft to carry dirt or things to fight the fire, and so they're fueling. They're using the large mobile refuelers to fuel the smaller mobile refuelers to get out to the aircraft, and that's when truck to truck. That's the example that was given to me. That's when it's used. It's not a commonly used at airports. Typically, you have the mobile refuelers fueling the aircraft, and they're fueled from an airport storage facility, typically.
Okay, so currently the lease would be in terms of the current standards. So if the standards change, then the lease refers to those current standards.
Yeah, the lease is subject to all airport standards. Yeah.
And also 4.4 does say, done in extraordinary or emergency circumstances, that if it was deemed that it was important, then we could have fire crew or somebody there in case something were to happen. Okay.
Yeah, it's within the discretion of the fire chief or airport manager when those extraordinary circumstances would be. And if there's a violation of the standards, the process in place is that a citation would be issued and possibly a permit revocation, and then permit revocations are subject to appeal. So there's a process in place for those.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hoskin?
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, would it be permissible? I think you mentioned something about truck to truck and 200 feet from an aircraft.
So the code says in the one that was quoted by Councilman Folder that it's 200 feet from an aircraft. That's the minimum. But again, the code also says that the fire chief's we're allowed to make, based on our community, adopt standards or even make them more stringent. And what it comes down to, when we have 7 people on duty, we still have to maintain medical services and structural fire protection and auto accidents. And so if we're stuck down there every day for truck to truck transfers, we're not doing those other things. We don't have, like some cities that have multiple stations can afford to take one out of service and go do that regularly. We need to stay in service because we're running medical calls and other things. And so that's why the extraordinary circumstance makes sense. So if we have a major wildland fire and they set up an air base, or a suppression where they fly in the planes and fill them up with water and different things, that might make sense for an extreme circumstance. We could set up some kind of a firefighting team out there during that example, but it couldn't be a regular thing.
If truck-to-truck transfer happened in an area, a designated area, would there be a fire issue? I mean, such as, I understand that it can't be close to an aircraft. That definitely I understand. Yeah. But if there was a specific place set aside just for truck-to-truck transfer, is there a fire issue with that, or do you see any issue with that at all? Well, sure, there's issues. I mean, obviously, it's going to take the people that are doing the transfer. You've got to ground and bond, so you have to connect the vehicles together and connect them to the ground, because aircraft fuel's heavier than air, so it settles down, and so any spark that it finds can cause a fire or an explosion. So obviously that's where the risks all come from. So it's not, I mean, anybody involved in that is at risk. And so whether the people willingly take that risk or not, they're still part of our community. And so that is there's still a life safety risk for sure. And then 8,000 gallons of aircraft fuel, or from the bigger tankers, that's got the potential to cause a huge fire and explosion. So yeah, I would say it's not a safe daily thing to do anyway. In my experience, the only time that we've done it is for when a tanker truck rolls over on the highway. You have to get that fuel out of there, and so we do a tank-to-tank transfer. And I know that's different than what's being talked about here, but that's the only example that I've routinely seen it done
is where it's an emergency situation. You need to get that fuel from one wrecked truck into a healthy truck so you can get it off the highway. As far as just doing it routinely, it's not done routinely. And partly because fuel's not supposed to be stored in semis for long terms. It's supposed to be stored in NFPA 30 certified tanks. So it's a special standard that talks about fuel storage. And so NFPA 30 doesn't allow fuel to be stored in semis. So that's why it's not done routinely, because it's not stored routinely. It's stored in underground tanks or above ground tanks that are fixed and meet a certain standard. And that's why you don't see it routinely places. That's why only in an emergency situation. Another emergency situation I can see is, for some reason, our airport fuel farm goes down, and it's going to take 3 weeks to get a new fuel farm put in there, and they would have to bring in trucks to keep the airplanes flying. And then we would have to set up some kind of a fire watch or some kind of response during that emergency situation until it's over. And then the tanks are restored and we go back to normal business. That would be the only other example that I would see would be a routine, would be something I would expect to see out here. But.
Do we ever have any semis coming in, tankers that are unloading into a truck rather than into the fuel farm?
Not to my knowledge. That might be the only semis that I know that come in that unload in the city and unload into our fuel farm or unload into the gas stations. I don't know of any other routine examples.
Good evening. The only, Marissa Adu, the airport manager. The only instance that we have currently going on is when Mr. Fonstock refuels his truck out at the airfield. He has a large tanker out there, and he'll have that refueled there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I guess I misunderstood your question. I was aware of that. I thought you wanted to know if there was other operations on the airport where they routinely do that.
No, she answered my
Okay, no, I was aware of that one. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just wondering if we had that issue, if we had tankers coming in. And am I understanding you correctly, Marissa, that we do have a tanker coming in and fueling Mr. Fonstock's truck, and then Mr. Fonstock takes that truck and fuels one of the smaller vehicles? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you too well.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Adams?
Thank you. I guess ultimately, what this comes down to is whether or not, this is something that we want to see and that we should consider as normal everyday use in Boulder City at our airport. From what I'm hearing from our fire chief, he doesn't feel comfortable that they are properly equipped or prepared to allow this to be a regular activity happening at our airport. It is written in such a way that should there be a circumstance that requires it for emergency or extraordinary purposes, that is there. And that's, with the relation, the note there is that these are the things that have to be met in order to do that in those situations. There's a reason why, I did not see, it was a truck-to-truck transfer or a ban on that was not in every fueling standards that I reviewed, but it was in the majority of the ones that I saw. It was very common to see just a simple thing that said no truck-to-truck transfers would be allowed. Some of them didn't even have the language that allowed the exception. Most of it, a lot of them just said no. So I do think that considering the safety concerns that have been cited by the fire chief, that this is reasonable. It's unfortunate. I understand that this will probably have impact on different users potentially, but we have to make sure that what we are doing here is we are providing a document that provides for safety, and that is the ultimate goal here. We have to do that. So. With that regards, I think that it should remain, and should circumstances change at our airport where we feel better equipped, or that the technology changes in such a way that it is not as much of a concern for it to be happening on a regular day-to-day basis, then we can go back and revisit that. But as it stands right now, with the concerns that have been cited, I'm not comfortable with it being a day-to-day operation at our airport, even if it currently is. That just because somebody always does something, just because I always speed on the freeway, doesn't mean that it's not a danger. Just because you're the one person who thinks you're good at driving home drunk, right? Just because you think you're good at it doesn't mean, and you've never gotten into an accident before, it doesn't make that a safe thing. It doesn't make that a safe thing at all. you're always putting people in danger when you take risks like that. So for me, I think we have to be serious when we talk about safety. And if our chief of fire is saying that this is not something that should be done on a regular day-to-day basis, then I'm going to agree with him, and I'm going to defer to his professional opinion on that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilmember Hoskins?
Well, I totally understand. However, this is happening from what we're being told. So this is not an unusual circumstance that we have going on right now.
It's happening in Boulder City, but in my opinion, it's a very unsafe circumstance. We've been fortunate nothing's happened, but it is an unsafe situation in our city. And so again, for me, it's all about safety. That's all any of this is for me, is we do our best to take advantage of the resources we have to protect the city as best we can. And so sometimes we have to do a little extra work, and I don't mind doing extra work, but sometimes it's just outside of our scope, is we just don't have the appropriate trucks to help make that safer. And like I said, the fact that it's not done very often across the country is because it's inherently unsafe. There are some places that, McCarran has Clark County has 1,000 firefighters. McCarran has a full department essentially at that airport, so they could potentially get around that and make it safer. We just can't. We don't have the equipment, and it wouldn't be fiscally responsible to try to go out and buy a $1 million crash truck and staff a crew to keep that operation, to make that safer. That would be so expensive just for that. I'll always take more firefighters. You're not going to ever get me to argue with that, but that wouldn't be a good use of them.
Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Councilman Adams, because it's been somebody's regular practice. If a resident makes a decision that they like the way they're doing things and they think it's a better way to do it, and because at the time there's no restriction on that, I tend to hesitate to say, well, just because that person's been doing that for all this time, it's okay for them to continue doing it. I think that's what standards and regulations are about. And sometimes it means saying to somebody, we're sorry you've been doing it this way. But we even look into situations of people building on, going over onto public property when they're expanding their yard. And we said, well, yeah, you've been using that for 10 years as part of your backyard, but that's not really part of your backyard. So just because it's become a common usage, to me, that's not necessarily a good reason to say, let's go continue doing it. I'm from what I've read and looked at, it very much concerns me to have that practice going on. So that's it.
Thank you. Ms. Adu, I know that, it's being said that, this is a common practice, but my understanding is this is one company that has been doing this. Is it your experience? You've been at the airport for, 10 years now?
Yeah, this is unique operation to be having conducted at the airport.
Okay, it's not standard procedure previously.
No.
So we have one individual who, I don't believe that this was ever a permitted type activity. In other words, express permission was not provided to this company to do this. Is that correct?
That's correct.
They just started doing it.
That's correct.
Okay. Councilmember Hoskins, thank you, Ms. Adu.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not trying to say that this is okay because it is being done. I'm trying to bring out what is actually being done and something that we really need to take into consideration. I'm not saying it's right that this is happening, and I don't speed. But it's something that needs to be brought out. If this is not allowable, then it should not happen.
Mayor.
Yes. Councilmember Folda?
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I don't expect this to be a regular thing, but I just think that there are circumstances in which this is done in most areas, airports, and between non-airport facilities too. There, this covers those, the ATA specs, that also covers different locomotives and aircraft and other kind of industries as well. But it does happen, and saying it is something that does happen. And I would encourage that the airport manager and the fire chief, when we have military or we have fire that's coming through our airport and has those emergency cars that associate with their helicopters or their aircraft, that they would be willing to make that exception to allow for those processes to happen and give permission in those circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. If the activity, if this remains as is, and if the activity is currently being conducted and would no longer be conducted, would the company that is currently doing this have a right of appeal? In other words, if they were told to cease a practice that they are doing at this time, what would be their course of action?
The course of action under these standards, so they would be effective 21 days after publication, and then there's 30 days to get into to have a plan of compliance. I believe, I want to be accurate here. Or do you know, Marissa, off the top, do they have 90 days for the plan to be effective? Or is it 30? In any case, once the standards are effective, and yes, they have to have 90 days. They have to explain how they'll comply within 90 days of the effective date, and required to have plans in place to be fully compliant within 30 days of the beginning of their fuel-related operations. So once these standards are effective, they would apply for a permit. If their model, is not compliant with our permit requirements and they're denied a permit, then denial affords an appeal right to the city council. Or if they are compliant and they're issued a permit and then they're later found to be non-compliant and their permit is revoked, again, they have an appeal right there's an intermediate board, and then if the intermediate board upholds the decision to revoke or deny the permit, then they have an appeal right to the city council.
And who is the intermediate board?
Apologies, Mayor, I couldn't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it is the Airport Permit Review Board, and it consists of the finance director, the city attorney, and the fire chief or their designee.
Again, the reason I'm asking those questions is I believe that if, either misinterpretations are made or, I hate to use the term, but bad decisions are made, an individual or a company has the right to bring that matter forward for consideration. So we're not talking about somebody being subjected to the whims of someone else. There is a right of appeal on this. All right. Any other questions or comments regarding this particular item, 4.4? Well, it's been answered to my satisfaction that this is a requirement. And again, I know from what I've looked at, even on hydrant systems like they use in McCarran, they don't want trucks being filled out of those hydrant systems. It's a significant danger of grounding, of electric static shock occurring when these trucks are being used, even on hydrant systems, which you would think are well grounded and all that. They don't allow that. The only thing you can use that hydrant system for is direct into the plane, not into a truck. So I think that this is a perfectly appropriate provision in the Councilmember Folda, are there any other provisions that you had concerns about?
Mayor, that was the main one that I had. I'm concerned, since I'm not an expert in this issue, that there may be others that are there that are unknown to me. But that was a major provision that I had concern with.
Thank you. Any other concerns, questions, comments? I do have a couple of comments regarding these standards. I think it's very important for us to always keep in mind that the Boulder City Municipal Airport is wholly owned by the City of Boulder City. It's built on city land. It was paid for, constructed with tax dollars. It is also defined as an enterprise fund, meaning that it has to support itself. Revenue has to be gained at the airport in order to operate it, do the maintenance, do improvements. All of that is to come from the operations at the airport. That's the definition in state law of an enterprise fund. There's even a specific law in Nevada law saying that airports, any revenue generated at the airports can only be used at airports. Airports have clearly a very special place in the law that they've carved out for themselves, that none of the revenue that might be produced at the airport can use to do any other benefit in Boulder City. It can only be used at the airport. And one of the things that happens at the airport is that the city charges for the use or the pumping or the distribution of fuel. That's not an unusual thing at all. As a matter of fact, I know from serving on the Regional Transportation Commission that some of that money was being taken from McCarran and provided to the Regional Transportation Commission. That stopped. That was found, nope, you cannot do that. So we need to look at the airport as something that has to raise its own revenue in order to remain stable. There's been a lot of talk about how the city's competing with selling fuel. Well, the only fuel that the city sells is either to the leaseholders, the tenants that wish to purchase the fuel that way, or self-service pumps. And the self-service pumps are there for the convenience of the general aviation pilots. It's not as though the city owns a fleet of refueling vehicles where they're out trying to undercut the leaseholders or the tenants that are there. That's simply not the case whatsoever. And these standards are going to be applied to all leaseholders equally, and I appreciate city staff taking the time to meet with them, discuss any issues that may have with these standards, and incorporating whatever could be incorporated into the standards. And lastly, I'll say, the city has a responsibility to operate a safe facility. And we have to look at that from the standpoint of what we have available to make that safe. I think Chief Gray brought that out very well. I know there's been talk of people down there at the airport, of pilots and leaseholders. Well, we're going to build this control tower and we're going to put a fire station under that and we're going to staff that with firefighters and everything will be peachy keen. Well, as Chief Gray pointed out, you're looking at one truck, a single truck, that could cost upwards of $1 million. You're looking at staffing that with probably half a dozen firefighters. And a single truck's probably not going to be enough. If you go out there to McCarran, they probably have 3 or 4 trucks ready to go, staffed with firefighters. My brother was stationed there at that station for quite a while. It's quite an operation. That's not something that the city of Boulder City can afford. So what do we do then if we can't afford that? Well, we may not be able to do some of the operations that are done elsewhere, and we need to make sure they're done safely. I think these standards do that. I think we have listened for an awfully long time to make different changes in these. I am perfectly fine with adopting these and including Section 4.4 as certainly a reasonable safety concern. Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Adams?
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to move to approve of Bill number 1895 with the changes here to the definition of a mobile refueler, so that permanently is not included.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Nay.
Aye will be 3, including myself. Nay will be council members Folda and Hoskins. All right. Thank you, staff, for all the work on this, and appreciate getting this finally put forth. Item number 11 for possible action, appointment to the Historic Preservation Committee.
Thank you, Mayor. There is one unexpired term that needs to be filled. The term would end on August of 2021, and there were 2 applications at the time the packet was prepared. We have one additional, and it's before you and will be uploaded to the packet within 24 hours, and that is Mr. Charles Hantz. So at this time, I just ask you to appoint one member to an unexpired term if you wish.
Thank you. And with that, I will open nominations for the position on the Historic Preservation Committee and will nominate Mr. Hantz. Are there any other names for nomination to the committee? Anyone wishing to make a motion to close nominations?
I move to close nominations.
I'll second.
All those in favor of closing nominations?
Aye.
Aye.
And with that, then, I assume we don't need a vote since we only have a single name. Congratulations to Mr. Hantz. Mr. Hantz had previously served on the committee, certainly has a dedication to preservation and providing information to the community. Item number 12 is our final public comment period. Anyone here in chambers that wishes to make public comment that this time can be on any issue? All right, we will go to the phone. Anyone wishing to make public comment during the final public comment period, again, you'll have up to 5 minutes to speak. That may be on any issue. The phone number to call is 702-589-9629. Again, this is our final public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak may call 702-589-9629. Madam City Clerk, were there any emails or voicemails submitted?
None were received.
Thank you. Again, this is our final public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak may call 702-589-9629. Hearing no one, we will close the final public comment period and move to our last item, City Council reports, and we'll begin with Councilmember Bridges.
Hey, thank you. Two specifically, as usual, emergency aid has funds to help people affected by the COVID pandemic or other emergencies with rental assistance, utility assistance, and food. It's on an appointment basis. I don't believe they're letting people into the building as of yet. And secondly, it reminds us by sitting on the Southern Nevada Water Authority Board, it's very important to remind people that it's very likely next year we will be relying on 7 billion gallons less water in Southern Nevada than we have right now. It's very important to follow seasonal watering restrictions, replacing grass with irrigated landscaping, and preventing and reducing water waste. And the second thing is I was very excited to see that the governor signed the water conservation bill requiring replacement of unused grass landscapes, AB 356. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hoskins?
Thank you, Mayor. I attended a Workforce Connection meeting today per Zoom. And I found out that our One Stop has reopened at the library, and you can contact Gina. And Gina requested that I make an announcement this evening that the Hoover Dam Lodge is looking for a maintenance person. So if you're interested, you can call Gina at 702-971-0176. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Adams?
Nothing to report, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Folda?
Thank you, Mayor. I attended the Oversight Panel for School Facilities. We discussed and had a presentation on the school district's capital improvement program. And during the meeting, the Oversight Panel approved a general obligation bond in the amount of $400 million for school facilities for Clark County. That is my report.
Thank you. I will say, as I've been saying for some time, I encourage people to look into getting the vaccine against the COVID-19 virus if you have not already. If you're hesitant about that, again, please check with your doctor or healthcare provider. For those of you who are still holding out for rewards, I heard today that the federal government might start a lottery, so this could be your lucky day coming up. But in all seriousness, folks, we're still short of where we need to be on getting a percentage of our population vaccinated, especially in that 20 to 50-year-old age range. Again, if you had it before, why bother trying to get it again? So the vaccines are out there. They're free. Contact the hospital, your pharmacies. It's out there and ready to go. This morning, I was at the ribbon cutting for the West Hall of the Convention Center, which is a $1 billion project for the first show, which was The World of Concrete. It is a real sign of Las Vegas coming back. And the way we come back is to show that all the visitors who come here can be safe, do not have to be concerned about it. McCarran Airport, the last 7 weekends in a row, has had increasing traffic through there and has also been the busiest airport in the United States. That's how we get Vegas back on its feet, back going again. That West Hall is just a magnificent building, and it needs to get used. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.